Mr. Paul Nee was born on November 27, 1941, in Bedford, Pennsylvania. He lived there all his life until he finished his term. Mr. Nee was a student and was commissioned into the Army right after high school. Mr. Nee was commissioned into the United States Army on November 1st, 1963. He joined in his own terms because he didn't want to be surprised with the draft paper.
Since the Selective Service draft was in effect, I had a choice of one of three things: enlisting in the Army, where I would serve a 3-year term. I could be drafted into the service and serve a 2-year term, or I could join a reserve component and serve 6 months active duty and then 5.5 years inactive duty. The advantage of that would be I could continue my civilian career and have a choice as to what I would do while I was in the service. So instead of waiting to be drafted and giving no choice as to what my future would be, I decided to join the Pennsylvania Army National Guard.
Although he didn't know what he wanted to do when he started, he knew he definitely wanted to be in the Army. Nobody influenced Nee's decision to join the Army. He had two brothers who served in the Army, so that branch was already well known in his family. When he told his parents about his decision to join the military, they were not very happy. Was your family supportive about you joining the Army?
No, they never are. They're afraid of harm coming your way, and they prefer if you don't do that. So there was really no support to do it.
They thought since he was joining the military that he would be deployed into duty in Vietnam, but this was not the case for Mr. Nee. He graduated from Williamsport Technical School in 1962 and was employed at Allegheny Ballistics for almost 2.5 years, where he worked as a design draftsperson. When Allegheny Ballistics went out of business, Nee had to make a decision: enlist in the Army or not. He decided to enlist in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. The Army was in his hometown, so he did not have to travel far to enlist. All branches of the armed forces have to go through basic training. Nee started his basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky in 1963. The army that he was attached to was affiliated with the 2nd Army at Fort Knox, so Nee was sent to Kentucky for his training. The conditions of the camps were nothing like home.
Right. We were taken in like a herd of cattle and put into barracks and treated not very nicely.
First weeks of training were hard, and if it got overwhelming, there was not much to do about it. The day started at 5 o'clock in the morning, and everyone had to be ready and have the barracks cleaned up before getting lined up for inspection. If something with the uniform was off, the soldier had to do physical punishment like push-ups. Physical training was after inspection and then came for breakfast. The rest of the day was spent in class, weapons training, or military coding of conduct.
Actually, they were trying to break you physically and mentally to turn you into a soldier. So it wasn't like going off to college.
After the first 8 weeks of basics, he started 8 weeks more of advanced training. This advanced training included more tactical training and classwork. This advanced training would make him into a commissioned officer, which meant that he would train others and lead a platoon. As a commissioned officer, Nee would hold two jobs: a training officer and a tank platoon leader. Training officers were in charge of getting new people ready for war and turning men into reliable soldiers. Nee would have to explain information to new soldiers in a way they would understand. He thought this was an easy part of teaching people. As well as understanding the concept, they would have to be able to apply the idea. Paul Nee also had to make sure his students could apply what they learned to battle. If they could not understand the material being taught to them, a new soldier would have to restart their basic training.
Training others was not the only job that Mr. Nee had done. Commissioned officers were also in charge of a platoon. Nee was a tank platoon leader, which meant that he was in charge of 5 tanks. Those 5 tanks were called a company, and they would train together until a part of the company was sent into active duty. The tanks in a company are a gunner, a loader, a tank commander, and a driver. If one part of the company was sent to fight in Vietnam, the rest of the company would stay in the United States and replace the other soldier. If they were not deployed, like Mr. Nee, they would train somewhere else, like Camp Pickett, Virginia, or Camp Drum, New York, for 2 weeks over the summer. Nee would perform tactical training with other tank companies to find out how active duty would work. While in the Army, a soldier did not have any time to do anything. Between training and teaching, Nee barely had enough time to write letters home to his mother.
Pretty much hung around the barracks and stuck around with your friends, and very seldom would you get a weekend pass.
Usually, there was no time to go out. Nee did not have time to celebrate his birthday or any holidays. The only event that Mr. Nee did celebrate was when he went from second lieutenant to a first lieutenant. He thought this was a huge accomplishment because only half of his class had actually graduated. The other half had either dropped out or were sent to an active duty. When people heard about the United States getting involved in Vietnam, the public was divided. Half thought that the military should not go and fight, but the other half supported the decision.
In our reserve components over here, we were shown a lot of respect. We were treated nicely.
His life went back to normal, and he put that part of his life behind him. He did not forget his experiences. Nee still appreciates the lessons of confidence, dedication, better leadership, better interaction with people, discipline, and respect the military had taught him. In fact, he recommends joining the armed forces because of what he had learned. After the United States had pulled out of Vietnam War, many soldiers were relieved. Nee was happy because America was not taking much ground and too many lives were being lost when little was being done. Sadly, North Vietnam overran South Vietnam and the entire country became communist. Nee thought America's mission in Vietnam was a good one, but the country had failed at fighting for democracy. Nee thinks that people need to know that America has always fought for democracy, but sometimes it is harder. Nobody knew who the enemy was in Vietnam because the enemy was not wearing a uniform.
It's the first war where we ever fought where our enemy wasn't wearing a uniform. If you think back on all the other wars, the majority of the combatants were wearing one uniform or the other, and you could tell who your enemies were. But in Vietnam, it became a guerrilla war where you didn't know if the person standing next to you was friend or enemy. So that was part of the real mental strain on the soldiers and Marines in Vietnam.
Nee says this is why fighting was so difficult in Vietnam. Nee had only been at Fort Knox, Kentucky for 6 months before he returned home. Since he was not gone for long, the first thing he wanted to do was wash his car and take it for a ride. He resumed his life as normal, but continued to live by some principles he learned from time serving. Since being home from Kentucky, Mr. Nee says that the Army was one of the best experiences he has ever been part of. He thinks that the lessons taught are valuable and that everyone should have part of a military training in their life to learn the lessons. Nee also thinks that America will continue to fight for freedom and equality, like the country has done in the past. Overall, Mr. Nee says that he highly recommends joining the armed forces to gain experience that only military could give someone.